The follow-up to Shinji Mikami's Resident Evil was going to be Hideki Kamiya's Resident Evil 2. However, due to creative differences while working on the project between Mikami, Kamiya, and the higher-ups at Capcom, the original version of Resident Evil 2 was scrapped. The newer version takes on some newer liberties with the series, and going against Mikami's desire to have Resident Evil 2 be the ending of the franchise. The RE2 team would take the series in a new direction that would leave a lasting impact on future games. The game is set 2 months after the events of the first Resident Evil, in Raccoon City itself. Claire Redfield is making her way into town in search of her brother, Chris, from the last game, who has gone missing. But Raccoon City is infected. There's been an outbreak of the T-virus and most of the city's inhabitants have been turned into zombies. Claire runs across a few of them at a gas station, which is also where she meets the rookie cop, Leon Kennedy. The two head deeper into the city towards the Raccoon City Police Department in order to figure out what's going on, but are derailed almost immediately and are separated. The opening section is completely different than RE1, starting you off surrounded by zombies that you need to duck and dive your way between until you get to the police station. Already a much more action-heavy start than the previous entry. When Claire finally gets the RPD, only one door is unlocked, and inside it is a wounded cop named Marvin. Marvin gives Claire a keycard, then kicks her back to the main hall. The keycard opens 2 doors, one for either side of the RPD, but only one door leads to progress. You then run into a Licker pretty early on, and Lickers are equivalent to the Hunters from Resident Evil 1. The notable thing about Lickers is that they can't see very well, and if you don't sprint past them or move while they're crouched, then they won't detect you. And that's a pretty good mechanic. It forces players to walk slowly in certain areas, instead of just sprinting past every enemy. Claire then runs up to the STARS office where she finds Chris's journal. In it, Chris says that he and the other remaining STARS members tried to bring justice to Umbrella, but the police chief Irons never followed through with an investigation. Chris ends his journal by saying that the members of STARS are headed to Europe, which is where the Umbrella Corporation is stationed at. Then you have to backtrack all the way to the main hall, then all the way back to the STARS office to keep progressing. Compared to Resident Evil 1, the opening is much more linear since the RPD is locked behind keys. Specially labeled keys are back, but instead of the sword, shield, armor, and helmet keys, we got the spade, diamond, heart, and club keys. However, the keys just don't open up enough areas. The only key that unlocks doors on both the west and the east side of the RPD is the diamond key, and even then it's only 2 doors. After getting the spade key, the game opens up a bit more. The first playthrough of the game can have you backtracking and running all over the station in a similar style to RE1. But if you replay the game with a solid route planned, you can collect 3 out of the 4 needed items to escape the police station pretty quickly. Oh yeah, we're collecting 4 items to leave the main area again. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Figuring out where the 4 items are and how to get them is the puzzle. And I don't mind that you have to solve the puzzle of where to go and in what order to get which item on the first playthrough. And I like that it's easier to route on following playthroughs because you've already solved the puzzle. Well, speaking of puzzles, the puzzles in this game are no better or worse than in Resident Evil 1. I think they're about the same. Push some stuff here, flip a switch there, read some numbers on a piece of paper, and so on and so on. They're fine, not really pushing the boundaries of brain teasers or anything. Anyway, a good thing I can say about the immediate linear progression of RE2 is that you get to run through the beautifully destroyed RPD. Compared to the, at times, bland Spencer Mansion, the RPD is covered in details and designs that make its backgrounds much more engaging. Destroyed barricades, shattered glass, and broken doors line the backgrounds of the game, which makes it feel much more fleshed out than the first one. Claire eventually runs into a little girl whose name is Sherry, and Sherry is being chased by a monster bigger and more horrible than any of the other zombies roaming the halls. Claire also runs into Chief Irons. The notes are back from the first game, and you can read all about Irons and a few reports scattered around, finding out that he is not only a rapist and a murderer, but also was employed by Umbrella and is responsible for covering up the Spencer Mansion incident. After running around the police station some more, Claire ends up in the parking garage where she runs into Sherry again. There is a brief section where you play as Sherry, but all you do is push a few blocks and collect a key for Claire. Sherry then gives Claire the key and runs off. It's the last key Claire needs to finish off exploring the RPD. Once she collects all 4 MacGuffin items, she returns to Chief Irons' office, where she uses them to open up a secret passage out of the station. She runs into Chief Irons again, and he talks about the G-Virus and how Sherry's parents are responsible for making it, which is good because it relates Sherry to the overall plot of the game. Then the Chief is torn apart by a G-Virus mutant implanted inside of him, which morphs into a monster that Claire has to kill. Claire then grabs Shelly, and the two of them escape into the city's sewers. The visual details of the characters in Resident Evil 2 is a massive step up from the first game. There's plenty of small touches added, like how Sherry will hold Claire's hand when they're standing near each other. Or another new addition to RE2 is that the playable characters visibly show when they're in caution or danger states. Before, you had to constantly be checking the menu, but now you'll see them limp if they're in a bad way. It's a nice little touch that adds a lot to the game. Anyway, there's another Sherry section as soon as they enter the sewers, where she runs around a little bit and is attacked by a monster. Claire has to run through the sewers after her, where she runs into Sherry's mom, Annette. Annette explains that the monster hunting Sherry is William Burkham, Annette's husband and Sherry's father. William and Annette were working on the G-Virus when an Umbrella military squad came for it. They gunned down Burkham and stole the G-Virus sample. Barely alive, William used another sample of the G-Virus on himself, turning himself into a mutant monster in the process. Annette also explains that William, very grossly, wants to spread the G-Virus, but only certain hosts can handle it. Sherry, being William's daughter, has a similar genetic makeup to William, so the mutant wants to use her. Basically, mutant G-Virus Burkham wants to reproduce with his own daughter. Gross. Anyway, Claire keeps moving through the sewers and fights a giant alligator to get to Sherry, who has been infected with the G-Virus. Then the two move through the sewers and head for Umbrella's underground lab. On their way there, Claire can pick up her last weapon, and now is as good a time as any to talk about the new weapons in the game. RE2 has some cool new weapons like the bow gun, the SMG, and the spark shot, which is a very cool lightning shooting weapon. With plenty of ammo to go around for the guns found in the game, and for the increasing hordes of enemies you gotta fight, RE2 definitely has a lot more combat than the original, including an unskippable boss battle before entering the lab against a mutated William Burkham. Actually, all boss battles are unskippable, which isn't normally a noteworthy thing, but in Resident Evil 1 you can run past the first Yawn fight, kill Plant 42 off-screen, and run past the giant spider boss. It's good then that the bosses in RE2 are much more visually interesting than giant noun, and that they don't just take place in empty square rooms. After defeating the big bad zombie dad, Claire takes an infected Sherry to a save room, then heads into the lab to find an antidote for the G-Virus. First she has to power up the lab, then meets my least favorite enemies in the game, the plant monsters. But a few fire-related attacks handle them well enough to not be a problem. The lab and the sewers before it are both pretty linear, so it doesn't take long for Claire to run into the plot again. Run into Annette again, who is quickly killed by William, but not before she gives Claire instructions on how to cure the G-Virus. Claire fixes up the cure as the self-destruct for the lab starts counting down. She gets in contact with Leon and asks him to get Sherry to the emergency train located at the bottom of the lab. She then heads off to her own exit where she meets Burkham in a more monstrous form. During the fight, Burkham transforms again into an even less humanoid monster but is ultimately defeated by Claire. Afterwards, Claire hops onto the emergency train where Leon and Sherry are already on board. She uses the antidote on the girl, and Sherry is cured of the G-Virus, and the three escape, and the game is over. Well, the game is kind of over. There are two characters you can play as in Resident Evil 2, and Claire is just one of them. Leon is the other, and while Leon does go through the same areas like the RPD, the sewers, and the lab, he has different boss encounters, different story beats, and meets different characters altogether. Leon starts his campaign in a totally different part of the RPD and witnesses the helicopter crash into the station. While exploring the RPD, an Umbrella helicopter drops a pod containing a giant tyrant in a trench coat who, outside of the actual game itself, is called Mr. X. Mr. X will occasionally appear in this campaign in unsuspecting spots trying to catch Leon off guard, and the surprise of that is scary. However, Mr. X only is in a few areas at a few specific times in the game, and is nowhere close to the roaming horrors that will show up in later titles. But he is a precursor to his fedora-wearing self and his rocket launcher-touting cousin. While in the RPD, Leon has to do the same thing Claire does, which is collect 4 items to get out of the police station, with the club key being located in a section of the parking lot. However, the placement of some of the items in Leon's story are located in different areas than compared to Claire's story, so it's not a complete repeat. When Leon reaches the parking lot, he meets a new character, Ada Wong. Ada is looking for her boyfriend John, who went missing a few months ago while working at the Spencer Mansion. If you remember, the computer you logged into in Resident Evil 1 had the login name John, and the password was the name of his girlfriend, Ada. Leon and Ada go to a different area, one Claire does not go to, which is the holding cells, where a reporter named Ben is being held. He tells the two about the corrupt chief and asks for a way out of the city. You then have a segment where you control Ada. It's just a repeat of Sherry's section. And she even comes across Sherry, who is spooked and drops a locket, which Ada takes. Ada grabs the club key for Leon and the two split up. Leon goes back to the RPD, gets chased by Mr. X one last time, and then heads back to Ben, only to find out that he was killed by Burkham. Leon has a fight against the G-Virus-infused William Burkham, then Leon and Ada escape to the sewers where Annette shoots Leon and Ada chases after her. Annette tells Ada that John is dead and also accuses Ada of being a spy sent to get the G-Virus. The same sewer level plays out with Leon like it does with Claire, except no giant alligator fight. And Leon and Ada head to Umbrella's lab, but not before fighting a new form of Burkham. The bosses switch up depending on what character you play as first. Claire fought the G-Virus mutant and the pipeless William Burkham, while Leon fought a pipe-wielding Burkham and the more evolving monster form of him at the elevator. What's also cool about RE2 is that the weapons are different for each character. Claire has a grenade launcher, a bowgun, and the spark shot, and Leon has a shotgun, a magnum, and later on a flamethrower. Leon also has to use small keys, like Chris from Resident Evil 1, to open small drawers that Claire can open normally. The drawers usually contain ammo for Claire, but Leon can get weapon upgrades, like turning his handgun into an automatic weapon, or upgrading his magnum and shotgun later on. The weapon upgrading is a cool idea, and it makes playing as the two feel different, even though they are mechanically the same. You can also interact with the two characters between the two campaigns. If Claire boards up a window with the electronic shutters, then they'll be shut when Leon gets there in the second campaign. Or you can choose to take the SMG or an item pouch as one character and leave the remainder for the other. And one of the last things you can do is this convoluted 2-fingerprint scanning system thingy in the lab, which only really contains some liquors and some ammo and not worth the trouble of doing at all. Anywho, at the lab, Leon has a new area to go to where he needs to activate the main elevator. He also has to run around through the lab and encounters Annette, who tells him that Ada is a spy and that she was using John to get to Umbrella, and now she's here for the G-Virus. Before Leon can learn anything else, Mr. X shows up. Leon powers up the elevator and then has a showdown against Mr. X. Ada shows up and beats the tyrant but is mortally wounded. She and Leon kiss and Ada apparently dies. Afterwards, Leon picks up Sherry nearby and uses the elevator to get the girl to the train. While powering up the train, Leon fights the super tyrant form of Mr. X, which is the hardest fight in the game. During the fight, a shadowy figure who looks and sounds a lot like Ada and who's wearing Sherry's pendant just like Ada was, shows up to drop off a rocket launcher.
Game over.
Leon blows up the tyrant for good and gets on the train. After completing both Leon and Claire's stories, the final boss fight happens. As the train is racing out of the underground, a giant mutated Burkham is on board, which Leon guns down. And as the three survivors escape, the train, the lab, and Burkham are all blown up in a massive explosion. That was one way to play the game. Resident Evil 2 technically has two campaigns, two for each character. The Claire A campaign is when you play as Claire first, which is followed by Leon B, and the Leon A campaign is when you play as Leon first, which is followed by Claire B. The Leon and Claire B scenarios are the ones that the characters encounter Mr. X and then fight the final form of Burkham. However, Claire A and Claire B both have to deal with Sherry, but Sherry doesn't get infected in Claire B. Instead, she's chased by Mr. X because of the G-Virus sample hidden away in her neck. And in Leon A and Leon B, Leon still has to deal with Ben dying and hangs out with Ada Wong. But Leon A has a very emotional ending between him and Ada where she threatens Leon with an unloaded gun and soon after falls to her death after being shot by Annette. The scenario options are good and they mix up the boss fights for each character too. What helps in replaying the game to see these new scenarios is that the voice acting and cutscene direction are much better in this game than in the original Resident Evil. They're not performing Metal Gear Solid, but you can tell that the devs didn't want RE2 to be as memeable as the first game. Though Leon does say, "Ada, wait," a lot. But, nothing's perfect.
Ada, wait!
After beating the game, Resident Evil 2 gives you a rank based off of how many times you saved, how many first aid sprays you used, and how fast you beat the game. Getting an A rank unlocks a special weapon, and also the ability to fight a zombified Brad, the helicopter pilot from Resident Evil 1. You can also unlock the 4th survivor, where you play as the Umbrella-employed soldier Hunk as he escapes the lab with the G-Virus sample. There's also a fun mode where you can play through Hunk's mini-episode as a giant block of tofu. These arcadey-like rewards are something Hideki Kamiya brought to the table along with the rankings and heavy action influence. And those rankings, rewards, and emphasis on action will be present in almost every Resident Evil game that follows, including the next venture into the survival horror that has another hero trying to get out of the infested Raccoon City. Her one last escape.